Hello and welcome to another episode of Unsourced Wall. As always, my name is Elvis and I'm your host. Alright, so it's going to be kind of a light one, but let's get right into it because there are some things that really do boggle my mind and I really want to try and parse down because sometimes I just can't understand how things get to the way or to the point they do. And the main thing I want to talk about, at least in news, there was this whole media circus about whether or not Henry Cavill had been replaced or dropped as Superman. And of course, this made a huge hubbub despite the fact that it wasn't so long ago. I think maybe a couple weeks ago, the last time this rumor was floated around and everyone took it really seriously as they took it just a couple of days ago. But that eventually ended up being that the rumor started from a parody account. So it was a bunch of hubbub over nothing. So keeping that in mind, hearing about this news right now, I felt like, well, I'll wait to see how it goes because last time it ended up being something of no consequence. Predictably, however, every other news sites like Variety or The Hollywood Reporter and comic sites like CBR, Newsarama, all of them just ran with this. They just ran with this, despite all linking back to unnamed and anonymous credible sources. And guess what? It ended up being nothing. At the end of the day, both Warner Brothers, Henry Cavill's agent or manager, I forget which it is, they just reiterated their previous stance on his role in DCU. Still Superman, but they doesn't have any plans for him right now. They said that months ago, and yet everyone went out of their mind to say he's gone. This is why DCU is over. This is why DCU should end. Affleck is gone as well. Well, that one's more likely, but still, they just sort of piggybacked on it, and it just blew up. And then you have articles afterwards saying, "Oh no, this is an inversion of the rumor. When we heard the rumor, we accidentally said it backwards." But the fact is, if it's an inversion of the rumor itself was trying to refute the actual legitimate stance they took a couple months ago. So it's just a lot of saving face at this point. And yes, maybe Henry Cavill isn't going to be Superman anymore, but the fact of the matter is that this whole media cycle, this whole news cycle was just a whole bunch of feedback noise about itself and perpetuating itself. I remember one article from CBR that was headlined, "The Anatomy of a Rumor, Michael B. Jordan as Superman." And again, this is something that was piggybacked as well, where they heard that Henry Cavill isn't Superman, so someone tweeted out or posted about saying, "Michael B. Jordan, could he be the next Superman?" And everyone ran with that too. So having a headline that says "Anatomy of Rumor," there's no need for like an anatomy or an analysis or dissection of how these things happened. Some people just stated bullshit gossip. So all you guys in comic book or comic movie journalism just sort of made it into a huge balloon that no one really should have given any deference to. So now we're left with people really trying to cover their asses and not look like really clickbaity pieces of shit. Still, when talking about Michael B. Jordan at least, I was surprised that they kept saying Superman because I would have imagined him being, I don't know, Shiloh Norman. And if I had to say one last thing about this particular news piece is that the worst part, outside of all the annoying and really desperate articles that came out, was that for some reason Tom Taylor decided to come out of whatever hole he's hiding in to try and convince people that his Earth 2 run was amazing by saying, "Ooh, Val Zod, he's black, I created him." Oh, you created a cardboard cutout prop character, Tom Taylor. You didn't do anything. You didn't do shit. But anyway, that was a really fun news item. Just to see all the chaos and mess of people just trying to get to the feeding frenzy first without knowing anything about what was going on. On the Marvel side, it's been less kind of fun stuff. Mostly by the fact the biggest news item was that we have the actual final rating for the Venom movie. And it's going to be a PG-13. Much to the dismay of pretty much everyone. And I have to say, probably the filmmakers and actors themselves, because as we've all known, they were really big proponents, especially in interviews, saying that this was going to be an R-rated movie. So to make it PG-13, it just seems kind of like, oh, the writing is on the wall. They made an R-rated movie, they filmed one, they wrote one. This is going to be a really truncated experience at best, because let's face it, if you're going to see a watered down edited version of a movie, you're going to notice it, where it's rough around the edges. That's something that everyone caught it on to immediately when it came to the Venom movie. And like, oh, well, yeah, that's not going to turn out great. So I see a lot of people saying, we're just going to wait for the unrated director's cut on the Blu-ray, which will probably happen. I don't think this is going to be something like Suicide Squad where they can't do that. They really cannot do something like that because all the actual scenes got chopped up into the montages. So, oh, I'm with that boat. If it turns out to be decent, I'll probably watch it. But at this point, I'm more excited, or at least more anticipating whether or not there's a director's cut, because what's the point? What's the point of seeing something that isn't a full actual experience? And for the last bit of movie news is that we're getting more details on Phil Coulson's role in the Captain Marvel movie, which all sounds insanely horrible because he worked better when he was just a nameless, faceless kind of cog in the machine and not some sort of super spy that we're meant to really find impressive, because that was a lot more interesting since you don't really see the archetype, and when you do, it's a nice little beat and a reminder that this is a universe where this kind of thing is supposed to be expected, so it becomes kind of a little funny beat, but then you make him into a grander sense of importance and it just sort of falls flat because you're ruining the joke. So that's gonna be fun to see because it didn't get fucking boring as hell. So that's it for movie news. In TV news, there's a little bit more going on, especially on DC's side, because we have the actual premiere of the DC Universe streaming site. It happened a couple of days early, even though it was meant to really launch on the 15th in time for Batman Day, which is when this should be uploaded. So happy Batman Day. Anyway, I'll be talking about that later on in more in-depth detail, so watch out for that. There's some questions about that as well, so we'll save that for later. But speaking of the streaming service, we have some more news about the TV shows therein, especially in terms of photos. We have gotten released a whole bevy of new Titans photos from the first couple episodes, including full shots of the costumes teamed together, as well as other tertiary characters like Jason Todd, who we already know is going to be the spotlight of one episode is already Robin, sort of doing that whole Marv Wolfman, George Perez sort of timeline lapse between post-crisis. So that makes sense, that fits. I know there's a bunch of click articles about, oh, whoa, how is this possible? Like, doesn't matter. He's stopped being Robin only recently. So it still gels together. And overall, I think that the aesthetic of it still looked pretty good. And I know that people are still going to be zeroing in on stuff like Starfire's dress, but in the end, it doesn't really matter because she has superpowers, so she can dress however the fuck she wants. Really, the only thing that gives me pause is that, again, some of the CW staff is working on it, which is insanely eye-rolling, but fine, it can work if it needs to work. On a more interesting note, we have Swamp Thing, which has been rumored to have found the person to act as the monster, not Alec Holland, but Swamp Thing already transformed, and it's going to be Derek Mears, who is most famous for portraying Jason in some of the Friday the 13th movies. So that's really fun. I think that's a really great pick because I've seen him in documentaries about Friday the 13th, and he seems like a very personable, very amiable kind of guy. And I think that's something that, even though Swamp Thing is meant to be more of a force, more of a sort of elusive character, especially that they're really trying to hit home with the synopsis and the plot premises of this version, you need to have that element. You need to have that hearty, human, emotional quotient. I think Derek Mears is a really great choice for that. So fingers crossed for that. That sounds really good. You also have some of the showrunners saying that they really want to take it as hard as an R rating as they can. Whatever that means. If that means it's going to be like not really R, but something like close to it while still being with the bounds like PG-13 or TVY 13 or 14, whatever their TV rating systems are. Good for them. I don't necessarily think that it needs to be an R because you can have a lot of gruesome, violent imagery while still being the bounds of something, say, not like lascivious or really too gruesome. It's all about how you play in the atmosphere, so hopefully they're not putting all their eggs in this one hypothetical basket where it's all about just the actual sort of content and not how you're actually using what you're bringing to the table with your creativity. Hope for the best there as well. But moving out of the streaming service news, we actually have some more news on Gotham. Not only do we have more set photos, say, of Catwoman and Bruce and all this other stuff, but we have casting news, which is that they have cast King Snake, who in DC Comics lore is Bane's father, and that's pretty interesting, not only because this is taking a real heavy influence from Year Zero and No Man's Land, with one of the recent posters actually having that as its tagline, No Man's Land, to the point where I honestly don't know where they could take this. They've already introduced the Venom serum in its prototypical form in the first season, and I don't think we've seen that since then, but bringing in Bane's dad and all that, they've done this before. They've done the whole progenitor is either the father or other extended relative of the main villain from the future, so hopefully they really do some legwork building up Bane, because that would be such a great little bookend. I know that didn't quite work, at least for me, with The Dark Knight Rises, but it's the Bane, like with Doomsday, is just one of those things where there's so much kind of mythical weight behind it due to how they've impacted like the mythos of the comics, that if you play the card just right, it can feel really satisfying and make it feel full circle. And as I mentioned before, I love full circle and secular storytelling, something that feels like it did come around at the end. Can't wait for that season. It looks great. And speaking of looking great, we do have finally a full front, full costume image of Robot Man from the Doom Patrol show, and he looks amazing. It's not my favorite design for his helm. I think it looks a bit too top heavy, but it really does look amazing. I'll post it right now when I do the slideshow for all of these pictures. If you can see it, it looks, well, like they actually did have a lot of effort and work that they mixed into the production of the show. It's not too much where it would be impossible to shoot it practically. It's enough where with the angles and however they film it and light it, it might turn out to look really imposing and unmistakable. Like I said, I do think the head is a bit top heavy. I think it looks a bit ill proportioned, but that can all go away with just how tactfully they present it. So all that stuff is fantastic. In more minor TV news, we do have one other thing, which is that The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina has released its first teaser trailer. It's coming out October 26th or in the 20s, I don't know, the weekend before Halloween. And it's not that interesting. I know that they are putting a lot of money and they actually have a lot of style put into this. It's the same kind of style as Riverdale, but with Sabrina and the actual direct comic this is taking inspiration from, that book, that comic is one of the least interesting and most boring horror comics I've ever read, because it doesn't do anything that it hasn't done before, and it's telling you to your face that it's not doing anything that hasn't been done before, citing its references. It's that kind of book, and whatever I hear about this show, it seems like that's the exact same mindset they're building this show off from. I think I remember hearing one article saying that they've announced a Twin Peaks episode or The Shining episode. I forget which one it was, but like, why? Why would you not only rip off / homage, air quotes, something already, but then admit that's what you're doing? How is that anyway gaining interest? And the comic is the same way. The comic, it tries to be cute by saying it's like Sabrina meets Rosemary's Baby, and then proceeds to actually be Rosemary's Baby. It's not Sabrina meets anything. It's like Rosemary's Baby with you slapping the names on it. It's just a mess, and I can't imagine, because of the intent that they're proudly displaying, that the show is going to be any better. It looks like it's going to be a beautiful, dumb mess. So good luck to them. I really can't care. Anyway, moving on into comic news, there's been a lot of crazy stuff going on, and some things I have a lot to talk about. First and foremost, let's get it out of the way. The sequel Vision series from Chelsea Kane, who I don't know, I haven't read anything she's done or know anything about her, but a lot of people have gone to a hubbub about it. It does seem like a really shitty situation in general, but it seems that the Vision sequel series has been cancelled and will not be released, despite apparently, and this is something that Kane has said on their Twitter, that the first 2 issues were, I guess, underway or done. I can't really make heads or tail out of it, but I was looking forward to it, at least as a base concept. I enjoyed the original series by Tom King, and it's probably the most enjoyment I've gotten of anything he's done solo. So I was hoping that this would be able to pick up the slack and do some of the interesting things that no one has seemed to be able to be doing with that concept since he left DC and did all the horribleness he's been doing. But that's not to be. And, well, that's, I guess, how Marvel rolls. I think the most likely possibility as for why this happened is that maybe they expected more of a groundspring of support for Vision after the Infinity Wars movie that they didn't end up seeing. So they decided to just cancel the Synergy book that this was probably meant to be. And that makes just a whole bunch of sense, because that's exactly the kind of thing Marvel would do anyway. So, oh well. Following up on that news, we have the announcement of a Miles Morales series, the first one since Bendis has left Marvel. So fingers crossed that now that Bendis is gone, Miles Morales can become a worthwhile character that isn't nothing but an inflatable prop and phrase catcher, because Miles Morales himself has been getting a lot of exposure in different kinds of media, and I'm pretty sure Marvel isn't too thick-headed enough to understand that, with him being both a main character in the upcoming animated movie Into the Spider-Verse and a playable character in the recent and apparently very well-received Spider-Man game. It just makes a lot of business sense that they should get out a comic, and the person they've tapped for it and the talent in general they tapped for it is pretty decent, and I really have hope for it. Although, as someone else has mentioned and other people have noted, is that, well, Marvel still has the tendency to stick their fingers and meddle and micromanage. So even with that, we won't really know if it's going to be any good or if they've nudged and cut it to hell until it's out. So best of luck to anyone who's trying to handle this future tentpole character they're really trying to make happen. And they haven't had any look at that, but I see so many people coming into comics saying, I'm really interested in Miles Morales. What should I read with him? And the only thing to recommend are either horribleness or really blandness. So if that can change it, then I'm completely behind it. Good for them. DC itself has some interesting stuff going on with announcing 2 things that I am both either completely against or insanely worried about. The first being that Steve Orlando has announced that he is going to be writing a 12-issue Martian Manhunter Maxi series. And honestly, 12 issues sounds like way too much fucking Orlando. It really does. I don't know who the hell could be behind that and who would really back that, because it just sounds awful. It really just sounds completely terrible. Because Orlando has proven time and again that outside of Williamson, he's probably one of the most boring writers that DC has at the moment, of the new wave of writers that they're trying to court and giving all these things. I know that there's a bunch of them, but Williamson and Orlando, they stick out because nothing they write ever really gels and feels like an entertaining whole. I know that Orlando at least has Midnighter and Midnight Impala, which work because they play heavily to that tone. But everything else he writes, like JLA and associated characters like that, they never come together, and they just feels like a huge waste of time and enjoyment. So best of luck to Martian Manhunter, but I can't imagine this turning out any good, especially with 12 issues. I'm only giving Electric Warriors some benefit because it's 6 issues, and with 6 issues, maybe Orlando will be able to do something good, or at least not dragged out, but who the hell knows. On the flip side, however, we have Robert Venditti, who is going to be doing a 12-issue Freedom Fighters maxi, and it's apparently going to be drawing from Mastermen. And Mastermen is probably my absolute favorite one-shot in the Multiversity series. I love it. I think it tells the most complete, really riveting and emotionally gripping story out of all of them. And I had hoped to see something about it, but not under Robert Venditti. I don't like him. I don't like his writing, and I've never liked anything he's written. Not even back when he did Demon Knights, which is probably his most palatable stuff, but even then it felt very rote and very uninspired. Like a creative drought. And Freedom Fighters deserves more than that, especially if something you're going to be using like Masterman as like a basis to jump off from. That just sounds really like a recipe for disaster waiting to happen. And that's a shame, because if I'm right and he stays on course as consistently bad with this, then that's a huge wellspring of actual tense and content that you could use wasted. So I'm fingers crossed for that. The art looks good by Eddie Barrows, and a lot of concepts sound great, but I just don't trust Robert Venditti to actually capitalize on making it a very satisfying and gripping experience. Good luck to them. And this is just some breaking news, but Carlos Ezquerra, who many of you might know as one of the Judge Dredd co-creators and a stalwart and amazing artist and comic creator, is having a second battle with lung cancer. And I just want to give out and send out prayers and love, and anyone who wants to go out and support him online, I'll set up a link to his Facebook page. And honestly, I wish him a speedy recovery as well, and hopefully he gets better soon and back on his feet. The world needs more like him. So let's move on into the main set piece here, which is a review of the DC Universe streaming service as it stands. They have announced that there are functionalities and aspects that they haven't integrated yet, which makes me wonder why the hell they wouldn't do that before they made it open to the public. They can be insane. So let's just get right into it. The service itself is a mixed bag. While it's not as horrible as I think a lot of people were expecting, and I know that a lot of complaints that I see came from beta testers, so there was a lot of kinks that were ironed out, but there are a lot more that still exist. So let's get down to the main points, is that the real kinkiness has to be with the filtering and sorting and cataloging. There's no ifs, ups, or bounds about that. There's little other stuff that's wrong, but the main problem will be this. You get on there, you go to movies, TVs, and comics, which is weird because movies and TVs are clumped together into one section and comics are a separate section instead of being 3 separate sections altogether. So when you click on each of them, you'll be sent to like a home page for that whole thing rather than say a list or say something that's filtered or sorted out. And the only way to get to that catalog list would be to go all the way to the bottom and click see all. And even then, it takes a while to load. First time I did it, the first couple of times, it wouldn't load. I thought there was no catalog whatsoever. I had to refresh a couple of times to get the catalog. Pounds for both of them. And so when you get the catalog, there's going to be a lot either duplicates or things that don't show up until you refresh again, which is just showing evidence that this has a lot of fritz going on, because that just seems very haphazard and honestly unengaging to the person using it. There's no real immersive experience if you don't really know what's on the service and to what extent. Like, I didn't know that some of the shows that it had were on there until I refreshed like the 4th time or went on there the 4th time. It came as a surprise. Did they just add this? No, it was already there. It just didn't show it, and instead it showed me 3 different versions, or well, it showed me 3 different links to say Birds of Prey, which is on there as well. So those are the main problems, and the most annoying because you want to make sure that you get everything. You have to keep going all the way down, load everything, then refresh it to make sure that everything's loaded. And even then, you might miss something or might replace some things in the process. Other problems would be the customization of your profile. It says you can customize your profile pic and your background avatar, but you can't. There's no real functionality to it. There's no button, there's no double click, there's no drag and drop that you can upload for your background or your profile pic. So it just seems really weird to have that. And this is something that carries on into the forums. There's 5 different forum sections for creators, fan contributions, or media, general comics, general movies, and general community. And it's a huge mess because each thread is just like one little thing and it's one whole thing. There's no pages, systems, it's all scrolling and it's very disorganized, and I can tell it's gonna be a huge chaotic thing that is gonna be horrible to navigate because when you make a thread you don't get like a link to that thread, you don't get notifications to anyone likes that thread or replies. If you want to keep up with that thread, you're gonna have to continually go on there, scroll to wherever it is now, because like I said, there's no page system, there's no nothing system, there's no sorting, and it seems like a hassle. I don't see why anyone or how anyone could get any entertainment or pleasure out of using it and trying to interface with other users on that. You can't even click on our users' bios to see links. You can't share links or lists that you created because you can create your own little profile lists about your favorite comics and your movies that are on the service. It's really underwhelming. And for $8 a month, it's not that bad, the selections of stuff, but it honestly all hinges on whether or not the shows are any good. And that's the thrift of it, because the comics there are either full runs, but it only counts for like the minis. The minis they have the full version of them. But if it's an ongoing or like a actual sort of writer run, you're out of luck. You have the middle section of John's JSA run, like 12 issues of that, and the first half of Hitman, but nothing else. And they only have one issue of Teen Titans. It just seems very backwards. Very, very backwards. But I do have one question from Makai Knight Aki on Twitter, and their question about the streaming service, at least they have another question that I'll get to later, was that what would I want in this streaming service that would make it a 100% worth my money? And like I said, $8, it's not that bad for, say, like the entire seasons of the DCAU. They have everything about the DCAU on there. It's incredible. I don't really like the DCAU, but for $8 to have like 100 or 200 plus episodes of a show, that's incredible. That's definitely worth it. But personally, I would like actual more shows that I actually enjoy from DC. I would want to see Smallville. For at least a couple months it would take me to rewatch Smallville. That would be 100% worth my money. The entirety of Hitman, 100% worth my money. Entirety of John's JSA, 100% worth my money. Any of these things, they would definitely pull me toward it. The shows being great, 100% worth it. As of now, it's an oddity. That's a little kitsch thing. It doesn't have a real core or soul focus yet. It's just very bare bones and it feels it. But like I said, cheap, and we'll see how it develops and evolves as it goes along. And I'm hoping for the best here. Anyway, let's move on into what I read this week. Alright, and there are some things that I actually really enjoyed. Let's get into it. First things first, we have the first issue of the new status quo for Red Hood and the Outlaws, in an arc called Red Hood Outlaw. And like I said before, this is going to be a temporary status quo, which is great because I was really hoping that this wouldn't stick around, and it's so hearty to know that because it's not the most enticing setup or first issue in this new status quo that it could have been. It's just a lot of really repeated tropes and cliches about guy on his own with a chip on his shoulder. And it's very kind of Western in that kind of sense, like Shane or something. But I mean, it's not bad. It just doesn't seem to have any enthusiasm within it. And the bigger shame would be that it doesn't really seem to be doing anything with Bizarro and Artemis, which was really something that had my engagement to it. I want to see where that develops. And so if I were just going on an arc with Jason, I guess trying to track down his drug lord that he and Roy were trying to track down in the annual. So I guess that's neat, but it would be more interesting if Red Hood was still on there and not destined to maybe die in Heroes in Crisis. So, I mean, it's not bad. It just doesn't seem like something that could grab your attention unless you're really into just bare bones stuff. Which is good, which is fine. It works as bare bones stuff. It works as a bare bones, like I said, drifter or guy on a trip alone kind of story. But compared to the same writer, same book, just a couple issues ago, it does feel like a really big downgrade. Moving on, we have Sideways number 8, which is the first proper issue of the Dark Multiverse 7 Soldiers arc. And honestly, it feels like a different book. And not in a good way. Not altogether good. While I did like that the previous issue set this all up, and I thought that was a great transition, it just feels like we stepped into something that has a different tone, different atmosphere, and different sort of motivations and character behind it than the previous one did, than the book as a whole does. And I have to say that it feels very indebted or very wrapped around the Seven Soldiers conceit, which I mean, of course, it it's meant to be a spotlight for the Seven Soldiers and trying to, get the interest of readers and audiences who really enjoy that Morrison angle and just that team. But it feels like very subsumed by it. Like, it doesn't feel like I'm reading sideways anymore. The book feels foreign to me. It feels very alien. And that's a shame, because there's a way to keep Sideways and that tone and atmosphere completely at the forefront while also having him be like a fish out of water into this new environment and feeling very refreshing and very alert. And that's not what happens here. It's not bad, but it doesn't feel like I'm reading Sideways. It feels like I'm reading some sort of fantasy or very rambunctious sci-fi kind of book. And we also introduced Sideways' Venom, or at least what people believe was Sideways' Venom. I'm not quite sure. Honestly, this is my main thing, is that I'm not quite sure that this was meant to be the way he was always going to be introduced. I just think that it was something on the fly, because while he is, of course, designed, and we've seen images of this character from the get-go since Sideways was announced, as a dark mirror version of Sideways himself, it doesn't seem to have any actual weight or connotations outside of just looking like him. There's no real connection there, just some guy. It just feels like very slapdash, at least in terms of keeping it sideways. As an issue itself, okay, there's nothing really I can talk about it. But in the overall sense of trying to keep this book alive, it feels like that kind of thing. It's a very desperate gimme sort of issue, because it feels very safe, which is a bit of a letdown, I have to say. It's a bit of a letdown. The art, however, is not Rocafort, but the person on it right now does a great job, commendable job at keeping the style and the on-modelness of everything. 3 cheers there. I just wish that it was a better reflection of the book as it had been, because that's why I read it. I don't read it to read like a different style of book. Gotta keep it consistent, and so far it's not. And speaking of things that might have disappointed me, it's League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, The Tempest #2, which is, of course, the second issue of the final miniseries of the entire League of Extraordinary Gentlemen saga. I really enjoyed the first issue. I know I've said that on the episode when it came out. I enjoyed it. I thought it was great. Perfect, right? I think it did a lot of commendable work in bridging the tones of the more lore-heavy series and the adventure series together. This, however, I think felt very shallow in not the best way. I think it felt shallow in a Century sort of way, where it's more about the references and the plot as it needs to chug along than anything coming or stemming from the actual characters and the plots that they're drawing from, because it just seems like there's no real tether. It just feels more like beats. While the first issue, you had the characters at least extrapolating on what we know and what the story has already unfolded. This just feels like, okay, we need a big downer moment, something that really ratchets up the tension and stakes, so they just do it. Whereas in the first issue, you have something that happens that creates very earned stakes, because all the pieces are already there to be manipulated into it. This is like, oh, I need to know something, and the character knows it, and the character needs to do something with that knowledge, and then they do it. It just happens way too rushed, and it happens all in the span of one thing. It's very lackluster in that sense. Despite the stakes it's playing with, which are insanely grand stakes, I had to give it to more on that front. It feels anticlimactic in all the worst ways. I still enjoy the series. I think the characters are still really fun, but presentation so far, at least in this issue, not living up to where it could be or where it should be. Still, what I did like about it were, like I said, the characters and even the back matter, which continues the Quatermass story. Perfect. Pitch perfect stuff, and I really enjoy the new characters that they're introducing. And Hugo Hercules in this issue is still, bar none, one of the best characters Moore has ever done. Like with Sideways and like with Red Hood and the Outlaws, it just doesn't reach the heights that I know these series under these writers can do. Oh, and I forgot about this, but I do want to review at least one more thing, which is The Wronger by Tom Payer with art by Jamal Igle, and honestly, it's part of their new line of Ahoy Comics, which is a new publisher that they've set up and has a whole slew of upcoming books, with The Wronger being the first one and apparently the flagship book. Honestly, it's okay. It's honestly a really enjoyable thing, and probably the first one this week that did entertain me to a great extent that I really do love to be entertained by. It's a simple premise, and it's executed with a lot of finesse and care that it is immediately familiar, while also doing some interesting things so that you don't feel like it's too derivative. Because it's obviously meant to be a callback to a lot of different things, but like I mentioned with Sabrina, you don't want it to be a callback in that it feels like it's just wholesale copy and pasting. And that's not the case with The Wronger. It takes that simple core conceit, a conceit that works in comics, and then just does it again, but this time with its own panache, its own atmosphere, its own talent, and its own enthusiasm and energy. Because these things, they happen again and again in superhero stories, because they work. And they work because the talent behind them puts in the work. And the premise as it is that a Bronze Age darker version of a superhero switches Earths with his more Silver Age counterpart, and the whole chaos and mess that ensues, it sets it up flawlessly. There's really no fat to this issue. There's nothing that really drags it down or that seems out of place. It flows from one point to the next, and that might seem like the most bare bones praise of an issue, but when you're playing with something that's new, that is about its own small universe, these archetypes that are completely their own, that's something that you can really fuck up. And I'm saying that, yeah, you can really mess it up to an extreme extent if you're not careful. And this has a lot of care put into it. It's just a lot of fun, and it's really well rendered. The art is fantastic. The writing is very energetic, and you really feel for these characters. You really get a great handle on the darker Bronze Age hero and the more Silver Age one immediately. Blend of the writing and the dialogue, plus the expressions and the very lot of liveliness the art from Eagle is put into it. So I'm really, really impressed and satisfied by this first issue, and it's so great to have another solitary series. And I mean solitary, something that is not beholden to anything else within my pull list to read from month to month, because that's something I'm always on the lookout for. Something that is just itself, that has nothing weighing it down, no baggage, and that's this. And it's a really refreshing read, and it's something that I'm always looking forward to. There's a lot of back matter in this issue too, like some things about the universe as it is, very, very Morrison and Moore-esque, like Supreme and that kind of stuff. So yeah, no, it's got a lot of material and bang for its buck. So AAA stars on this series for presentation and writing, art, it's all there. It's a really fun little thing. So if you're interested in classic storytelling of a superhero kind, then yeah, definitely check it out. I know that I don't regret it at all, and that's something that I really appreciate given the latest issues that were out this week. So good. And because I'm so scatterbrained today, I actually forgot one last thing I read, which has to be Fantastic Four #2, which is Dan Slott's second issue, and overall kind of disappointed, thus ending this off on a very bad note. I know, a bit of a downer. Hopefully next week will be a lot stronger in terms of comic releases, but this week, unfortunately, it doesn't seem to be the case. It's an okay issue, it's fine. It's just not as cute or as solidly concerned about one thing as the previous issue was. I liked the previous issue, and I know a lot of people didn't, but it was okay with me because it just had a lot of nice moments that did have a core around them. This just feels like an overview of like, oh, here's what Reed and Sue and the kids have been doing. Except it feels very washed out. It feels very rote and very tired, especially with the kids, because the kids I know in Hickman's run and in other runs, they were a big, indelible part of the Fantastic Four, and here they just feel like background stuff, and I feel like that was a wasted opportunity. Next issue is when things actually start coming to a head and they start becoming teen again. Maybe that'll be better. I can't be sure though. I can't be sure. It's a bit of a downgrade, and it did lose a lot of momentum that it should have been continuing and it should have been trying to build up. So that's a misstep on Dan Slott's part, sadly enough. But yeah, fingers crossed for next week coming out with better comics. Alright, so we only have one question this week for listener questions, so let's get right on to that. It's again by Mackay Knight Aki on Twitter, and their question is, what do I think about Justice League Dark if I am reading it? And unfortunately, I am not reading Justice League Dark, or at least I'm not reading the current volume of it. I have tried reading it from time to time before, like under Jeff Lemire and under J.M. DeMatteis. And for me, it's one of those series that no writer has quite been able to make work. Jeff Lemire has an incredibly unfortunate track record with teams, and Justice League Dark is clearly one of the weakest attempts he's ever gotten with something. It felt very hackneyed and very bland and dry, and I don't think he had any original ideas with that series. GM DeMatteis felt more old school, but he was hampered by status quo changes, events, and being way too bland to a fault. I think he did some interesting concepts, but it only works with something like a few characters, and then the rest are all being wasted because they don't really fit the atmosphere that DeMatteis was trying to cultivate with these concepts. So it just feels like very wishy-washy. So yeah, that's why I'm not reading the current volume, especially since Tinian isn't one of my favorite comic writers. I think that he's in that same category as Orlando and Williamson, where he might have some interesting ideas, but overall the execution has been very lackluster and boring. I mean, I hear good things about it, but I hear good things about it from people that like Tinian on the whole, so that's kind of my cue to stay away from it. But if you are enjoying it, then more power to you. That's great. I think that there needs to be more fans of things in general that are able to just say, like, I'm a fan of this. So good. That's kudos. I just think that's one of those concepts that is kind of faulty to a root core that in order to work, a writer really need to come in and destroy our expectations of what Justice League Dark means. And I don't think that's ever going to happen anytime soon. Anyway, thank you for that question, Matt Guy Knight. I hope I answered both of your questions to your satisfaction. And I really enjoy and I'm grateful that you would send any in. And I'm always grateful for anyone who does. So if anyone out there has any questions, comments, or topics you would like to hear discussed or answered on the show, then you can tweet at me on my Twitter at THE_SNICKMAN. And a special grateful shout out to the artist who did the cover art at DOTEMCEE. With another grateful bow to anyone out there who's been listening and commenting and giving feedback. There would be no show without any of you, and I'm eternally grateful and humbled by all that. And thank you so very much. Thank you all for listening this week, and see you next week. Have a great weekend and great Batman Day. Maybe we'll do something about that next week, see what happens. But until then, goodbye.